Battlefield 6 is currently in a tough spot. We've seen the cycle before with other titles. We get this hyped reveal in the summer, then we get the launch, the inevitable community backlash when they discover things aren't working correctly, and then this long, slow crawl back towards a position where the game can actually succeed. And today we're in that precise position, with the game attempting to navigate its way back up in people's expectations. The game really didn't hit home with the community with Season 1 or Season 2, despite a few elements of those seasons being pretty positive steps. But in general, there were just too many negative parts interspersed with too few real good pieces of content. But today we've got a community update from the dev team, which, compared to past communications, does go on the offensive a little bit. It sets out what the team sees as the future blueprint for Battlefield 6 seasons. It sort of leans into core elements that have needed attention since launch, like vehicle gameplay, gives us a little bit more detail on the upcoming Golmud Railway map returning from Battlefield 4, and it even gives RedSec players a win with the announcement of solos testing. Now, it's not all good news. There are several elements revealed today that I don't feel are taking Battlefield 6 in the right direction, and so I want to make sure we cover everything in this video. But without really getting a roadmap, so to speak, this blog post feels like the closest we've gotten so far. There's plenty of detail that we can speak about today. So subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with Battlefield 6, drop the video a like for the almighty YouTube algorithm, and let's jump into it. Okay, let's address the biggest element first of all, Season 2 and the reaction from the community. Now, I've been pretty steadfast in my opinion so far, that whilst Contaminated, the new map that launched with Season 2, and the weapons and vehicles that have been added, are pretty solid, it still feels like a far cry from Battlefield updates past, where with games like Battlefield 3 and 4, we were delivered at least 4 new maps on day one. Several new weapons, several new vehicles, and gadgets thrown in on top. A seasonal update for Battlefield 6 feels very lackluster by comparison. In the Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 era, those large content drops every few months, they massively shook up how the game played. It injected a real shift in the types of weapons you'd be using or would be killed by, the types of vehicles you'd see rolling or flying around the map, and of course the maps themselves. You'd be fighting in brand new locations. Not location, locations, multiple. Cycling between them and experiencing something tangibly very different from what had come before. Now, with Battlefield 6, in this era of live service, we have a stance from the development team that appears on paper to be a focus on quality over quantity. And while I can accept that Battlefield 6 in its current state does need some of that focus on quality, I actually feel like that stance is being used as a shield to lessen the overall content that's being provided. Despite more developers than ever seemingly working on this project, the quantity of output is extremely disappointing. This blog post tells us that the developers took note of the community sentiment from launch and across Season 1 and decided that Season 2 would benefit from extra time in the oven, being delayed for around a month or so, and would arrive with many quality of life features that would support Season 2's content. But I think the developers and the decision makers at the top have wildly miscalculated what players of Battlefield have come to expect in terms of content. When you remove 3/4 of the map content from a seasonal update, akin to a DLC release from past titles, and try and dress it up as a big update, players see straight through that. When you've got 4 different studios working on this game, studios that have worked on huge titles like Star Wars Battlefront and Need for Speed, and then you only produce 1 map to launch your new season, it just doesn't match up. Clearly there's a plethora of resources available across the wider Battlefield Studios team, and it doesn't appear that those resources are being utilised in the correct manner, or at least the manner that Battlefield fans have come to expect based on expectations set by past titles in the franchise. As I said, the new Contaminated map is a good one, and the launch of Season 2 certainly positions Battlefield 6 as a more working product than what it was before. But it feels like we're being sold this premium level of polish with more quality in the content with this budget amount of content. There's just not enough of it. And when the game we're speaking about sits as the best-selling game of 2025, pulling in massive amounts of money from sales, that picture just doesn't really sit right with me. Okay, let's move on to another part of the blog post. Let's talk about how Battlefield Studios and EA is trying to keep the game fresh between these lean content drops, the article spends quite a lot of time talking about limited time modes, or LTMs. And to be fair, I'm glad it did, because the community has been speaking about this a lot. And even though I don't really agree with their stance on this, it's nice to see them address the topic. They describe these LTMs as a toolbox for innovation, a way to test environmental twists like the VL7 smoke for area denial where you have to stick your gas mask on, or that freeze mechanic from the Winter Offensive on the Empire State map that we saw during Season 1. And the devs are leaning pretty hard into this idea. I showed you in a previous video what the roadmap for Season 2 looks like if you have all the LTMs taken away, and it removed over half of the content in that roadmap. Now, the devs say that LTMs allow them to reshape engagement ranges and add new tactical considerations without permanently changing the game. By keeping these elements in an LTM rather than forcing them into the main playlists, they're able to appeal to different types of players. And look, on the surface, that does sound like a pretty smart move, because then there's options for everybody, but I've got a bit of a reality check here. LTMs are not real content. There is a growing feeling in the community, if you go on Reddit and social media you can see it, that these LTMs, these modes, are being used to take over the space that's usually reserved for tangible, real content. Battlefield fans don't log in hoping for a new way to play on the same map that they've been running for several months at a time. They want new places to play on. They want the geography to change, not the visibility via a gas mask. When the article mentions that they offer dedicated playlists for this VL7 smoke thing during Season 2, because, quote, reactions could vary, end quote, that to me is just like a polite way of saying that they know they're polarizing the player base with this addition. They're giving us this added chaos in form of an LTM because, in my opinion, I think it's cheaper to develop something like that than a brand new 64-player map. The blog post goes on to mention that all of these mechanics that are being built are being added to Portal so that players in the community can go out and build their own versions of this stuff. They can have it activated in certain areas of maps or experiences that they create, and that is pretty cool. The freeze mechanic is already in Portal, and I think the VL7 smoke stuff will be added in the near future. But to be honest, how many of us are actually booting up Portal to play with a gimmick from a 3-week LTM? Not many people are doing that. Admittedly, I don't think many people are booting up Portal at all because of how poorly it's been managed so far, but that's a different conversation for another day. I think, realistically here, the community want to see more from this multi-studio production that we have for Battlefield 6. 4 studios working on this game. I think it's reasonable to expect 4 maps per DLC, like we used to get. Instead, we're kind of getting this smoke and mirrors, trinket, shiny approach with LTMs. And the team is like dressing it up as a new experience or a fresh approach, whatever they want to call it. I just fundamentally disagree with that. I don't think you can build excitement on temporary game modes. I think you build it on permanent maps and locations when it comes to a Battlefield game. Right now, we have this toolbox of extra features, which is what they talk about for all these LTMs. It's like a toolbox. We have an ever-increasing toolbox of these things that people didn't ask for, and unfortunately, the map rotation is looking pretty bare. Players are asking for more maps, so in my head, I think it's pretty simple. You deliver more maps. And that brings me to the latest update on progression. This is a positive part of the video. Battlefield Studios is finally admitting that certain parts of the game, specifically weapon mastery, are simply taking far too long to feel rewarding. So they're making the necessary changes. They're going to tune the mastery XP curve, they're going to smooth out the attachment unlocks so you get them sooner, and they're finally going to make sidearms rank up at the speed that actually aligns with primary weapons, because that's something I noticed at the beginning of Season 2. I barely had any attachments for my secondary weapons, and I think it's because I've just been using the same one because it's taken so long to rank them up. And even the camo unlocks are going to be moved earlier on in the grind, so you get some semblance of achievement before you've spent 40 hours using a single rifle and only gotten a few attachments. Now, I really do appreciate these changes. They are targeted, quite small adjustments, but they're going to reduce that unnecessary grind that the game has employed since launch. Ironically, the developers are telling us that progression has taken too long in their opinion, and it's taken them, like, 5 months to change the progression in the game. A little bit on the nose there. We've been given this feedback since day one. We told them the mastery curve felt like a grind, a second job. It wasn't enjoyable. We told them that by the time you unlock a cool camo, you're usually bored of using the gun. It's taken them a long time to monitor this data and to review the experience when the issue has been right in front of their eyes the entire time. The simple fix was right there pretty much from the first week after launch, and we're only just now getting it. This kind of feels like the exact position the rest of the game is in. I spoke about it at the beginning. We get the hype before launch. Then we get the launch. And then after launch, we discover all of the problems that the game has got. And then the game has that slow crawl back to a position where it finally plays like the Battlefield game we expect. This scenario right here with Weapon XP. We're in that exact period right now. The devs have said they'll continue to evaluate and refine this later in the season. So my question is, why does everything in this game have to be an ongoing discussion for like months before we see it implemented in the game? The standard of the fix for Season 2 and a lot of the stuff is pretty high, and I can appreciate the focus on quality again because the game needed it. But the speed of the fix, I think, is the real bottleneck here. The signs were there for Weapon XP on launch week, and it's taken far too long to address the issue. Now let's talk about something I actually want to be excited about, Gold Mud Railway. The devs are currently working on this classic Battlefield map in Battlefield Labs as a testing function to sort of bring it up to Battlefield 6 standards. And I'll give them credit, it is a good choice of map for the game, and it's currently going to fill a gap in the map lineup. It's the kind of wide open, all-out warfare map that this game desperately needs. They're reimagining it for Battlefield 6, as I said. They're reworking the northern town for better infantry flow and adding more cover across the map so that infantry and vehicles work better together. So on paper, this is exactly the right direction the game should be going in. It's being worked on in conjunction with various vehicle gameplay changes as well, something the team actively took on as feedback post-launch, despite all that feedback existing before launch from the open beta. They're actively reworking most vehicle gameplay loops so they better fit into the Battlefield 6 ecosystem alongside infantry gameplay, which was the clear focus at launch, we have to be honest. The glass cannon approach that we currently have with helicopter balance has been almost universally discredited by the community, so to see the devs actually listening and changing it, that is good news. We won't see the results of this Gold Mud Railway testing out in the public domain for some time, however, as the map is scheduled for a later season, likely Season 3, and I do sincerely hope that that map isn't being substituted for a new original map either. Season 3 would be a great place to start increasing the map count, taking us up to 3 and eventually pushing things up to 4 maps in Season 4. That would be ideal. Whether that happens remains to be seen. And this nicely brings me along to the last sort of big part of the blog post. From March 6th to March 9th, the dev team are going to be testing solo Battle Royale in the main Battlefield 6 client under the label of Battlefield Labs. So you'll be able to play it, you'll be able to talk about it if you want to stream it, if you want to make videos, you want to make a Reddit post or give feedback on social media, you'll be allowed to do that. There's no NDA here. So they're pitching this as like an experimental new step for RedSec, but I think the question needs to be asked, why wasn't this in the game at launch? There's a huge segment of the gaming community out there that doesn't play games with a consistent squad. They don't want to rely on this luck of the draw, random teammates in quads or duos who don't have mics, who aren't going to play with them properly. So launching a major BR mode like RedSec without a solo option, I think, was a massive oversight, and I think it cost them a large chunk of the player base in those first couple of weeks. If you're someone that doesn't like to play with others, you don't want to play with other teammates, you only like relying on yourself, RedSec was a completely dead product to you because there was no offering that allowed you to play the game the way you wanted to play. Pretty much every Battle Royale out there has a solos option so that people that want to play on their own can play on their own. I feel like it was a huge oversight. Now they're finally bringing it in, they're giving it this Battlefield Labs branding, so they're just evaluating everything at this point, which is why it's only active over the weekend. They're going to be evaluating the pacing and the tension. There are tanks in this solo mode as well. I don't know if that's a good idea. I will definitely be playing it to figure out whether tanks are good in solos. They've even admitted that some of the stuff like the UI and the audio, like the shouts from your character, have not been re-recorded for a solos mode. they are only going to work as if you're playing with a squad. So you'll be playing alone, and sometimes your character is going to shout out as if there's someone nearby to you that maybe they need something, and there's just going to be no one there to listen. I think that's really strange, because, like, for me, how could solos have not been in the conversation from launch? I just don't understand it. It's actually a way that I really like to play Battle Royales. I really like solos. I loved it in Warzone, and I thought I was going to really enjoy it in RedSec, and then when I found out it wasn't going to be there at launch, you know, it's just a big chunk of the mode that I'm not going to be able to experience. And I think it's now a little bit harder to get excited about a feature like this that should have been there since the first day. Obviously, the devs want our feedback. They want us to fill out surveys and give our feedback on social media and Reddit. And they want us to basically test the mode to see whether it's going to work. I think it's quite frustrating that they're asking for our help now when the feedback was there from the very beginning once again, that this kind of stuff should have been there from launch. People have wanted this since the very beginning, and now they're asking us to help them test it to see whether it's right for the game. So, where does this leave us then? Well, we don't have an official shiny PDF roadmap for the rest of Battlefield 6's life cycle, but make no mistake, this blog post here, it is the roadmap. If you read between the lines, the underpinnings of the future are right here in front of us. And I'll be honest, I don't think this is the right way to go. What we're seeing is basically ongoing maintenance of the product, sprinkled in with a few actual pieces of content. The future consists of quality of life features, which we should have had months ago, and a lack of tangible, fresh environments papered over with limited time modes. And that's the great irony of this limited time mode strategy. The devs pitch these modes as a way to expand the sandbox, and I actually think they do the opposite. When you introduce a mode with like forced visibility, like this VL7 smoke, or environmental twists like the freezing mechanic that we had during Season 1, I don't actually think you're opening up the Battlefield sandbox. You're putting the experience on rails. The devs are telling us exactly how they want the combat to unfold. They're saying that they know best, so play it this way for 2 weeks. A lot of players don't want to do that. Battlefield is at its best when I think the developers give us a location, not an idea of what they want us to do. We don't want more environmental gimmicks or retuned experiences on the same maps. I certainly don't. I want new biomes, new geography, new locations that challenge us to use the sandbox in a different way. I don't want to be a test subject for a developer's latest grand idea for how they think the game should be played. Battlefield has always excelled when the players play the game the way they want to. This blog post shows a team that is incredibly focused on a curated experience for Battlefield 6. The entire section on LTMs dominating the blog post gave me the sense that the dev team is actively pushing back against community sentiment and that they believe they know best. But to be honest, until the focus shifts away from limited time modes and FOMO elements and back towards tangible content like new maps, weapons, and vehicles, players are going to continue to feel like they're not being listened to, and they'll continue to vote with their feet. The community and the developers are essentially at loggerheads here, and I feel, being a player myself, like the developers are just continuing to shoot themselves in the foot. Season 2 didn't create a big returning interest in Battlefield 6 with this doubling down on the same approach. So surely now, the time to pivot is upon them. I've given feedback consistently since the launch of Battlefield 6, before the launch, going back to previous titles in the franchise, that maps, weapons, vehicles, and gadgets are the absolute #1 element that should be focused on post-launch. That feedback has been consistent from fans for basically over a decade at this point, and it's still largely being ignored. Now, I appreciate the polish that's come with Season 2. I do appreciate that the devs are finally listening to feedback on weapon progression, vehicle updates, and other elements. But I trade a lot of that for more large-scale maps that we know Battlefield for. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you soon.